Dumas' greatest contribution to writing is that he's really the first sitcom producer, if you will. In a way, what he did is made literature so accessible to everyone that it became a pleasure to read.
Little in Alexander Dumas' childhood suggested he would become a writer of history and a part of history, crafting epic swashbucklers like The Three Musketeers and The Count of Monte Cristo.
Dumas was very proud of his Caribbean heritage from Saint-Domingue, and he would define himself as a Carteron, a quarter black blood.
Born in France, the grandson of an aristocrat and an Afro-Caribbean slave, he met tragedy at a young age when his father died, leaving him to grow up in poverty and without proper schooling. His only marketable skill was his beautiful handwriting, which won him work as a humble copy clerk in Paris, where he became a voracious reader and fell in love with writing. Attracted to the theatre, he plunged into experiments in playwriting, becoming an instant success.
He knew that it was the place to get quick fame, and he managed to do so with the play Henry III. And it's hard to imagine how passionate people were about art at that time, and there were almost riots and duels in the theatre itself at that moment. It was quite a scene.
Then, seeking new worlds to conquer, Dumas turned his attention to pursuits that would set books bearing his name and containing his words on shelves throughout the world and across the centuries.
The serial novel at the time, as it was called, or the feuilleton, the leaflet, because there was only one leaf published every day in each paper, really held the audience's breath. And of course, the newspapers could sold a lot of copies that way. Most of the novels from Alexandre Dumas were actually wrote in collaboration. Now, the idea of collaboration at this time is very different. Auguste Maquet, who was a friend of Gérard de Nerval, came to Alexandre Dumas first so that Alexandre Dumas could rewrite one of Maquet's plays. And Maquet had the play produced and was the only one on the bill. After that, their collaboration extended to historical novels, and Auguste Maquet would, most of the time, would provide the plot, and Alexandre Dumas would fill in with the writing and his very witty style. Auguste Maquet never really minded, and there are letters about this, since actually it would generate more money, because Auguste Maquet wasn't a famous name and Alexandre Dumas was, so they knew they could generate more money that way, and it was never a problem.
Filled with drama, women, and financial ups and downs, Dumas' own life was as thrilling as the lives of his characters.
I think Dumas wanted to live its life at its fullest extent, and in that way is very much the epitome of the romantic writer. Most of them were very involved politically. In the case of Dumas, he participated in the 1830s revolution in Paris, and later on went to help Garibaldi unite Italy. And not just with money, but he went actually physically on the barricades and fought with his sword. He was an excellent swordman. He knew how to ride a horse. So that you can see that he was a musketeer in a way himself.
Dumas' success as a playwright carried over effortlessly into his career as a novelist. Beloved from its first publication, The Three Musketeers is a timeless tale of heroism, intrigue, and camaraderie, one that has been adapted to the screen again and again. Written only months later, his next effort was an equally rousing and immortal struggle between good and evil. But the novel's origins were as humble as its authors. The moment Dumas landed on the Isle of Monte Cristo for a hunting trip with Napoleon Bonaparte's nephew, and learned that he could be quarantined for 6 days, he turned round and returned home, but nevertheless vowed that the island of Monte Cristo would figure in a future novel. With a title but no plot, Dumas suddenly recalled an obscure police file he'd once read concerning a shoemaker unjustly thrown in prison. Befriending a preacher there, a strange turn of fate led to his becoming heir to a vast fortune. Once free, the shoemaker used that fortune to seek vengeance on the men who had wronged him. Thus, the Count of Monte Cristo was born and became a literary treasure. So much so that its legacy followed Dumas for the remainder of his life.
It's like, you know, the castle that he built, he called it Monte Cristo. So the characters became so alive to him and to the audience that people thought they were real characters. And that people went to the Château d'If to visit the cell, were asking for Edmond Dantès' cell. And they got what they wanted. There was an Edmond Dantès' cell. So that history is being recreated in the name of fiction. And that people start, you know, mixing the two. He was so good at recreating fiction that his fiction became history.
Alexander Dumas wrote over 250 novels, travel pieces, and memoirs. Adapted into films, translated into many languages, and enjoyed around the world, his work has lived on in the imaginations of countless generations.
There's an anecdote that kind of might help answer how he felt about himself at the end of his life. The anecdote is that Alexandre Dumas' fils, the son of Alexandre Dumas, who was himself a famous writer, caught his father reading The Three Musketeers. And Alexandre Dumas was so busy writing that he never really read his own work. And he finished the book, put it down, looked at his son and said, "That was fairly good, wasn't it?"
The biggest hurdle is always the same with writing. For me, maybe it's not true with other writers, structure. That's the hard part. It's outlining and deciding what happens now. What happens now and what's the best way it happens. That is very tough, and when you're adapting something like The Count of Monte Cristo, the great concern became, how do I synthesize this in 2 hours, something that really has loads of characters, loads of locations, very little action. How do I get that into a powerful movie?
Which of you is Edmond Dantès?
I am.
Edmond Dantès, you're under arrest by order of the magistrate of Marseille.
Arrest? On what charges?
The essence of the tale is young guy, imprisoned falsely, manages to escape, wreaks revenge. That's the essence of the tale. Now, you say to yourself, how do I take this spine and tell this tale in the most compelling, theatrical, and visual way? The first step is not to view it as a legendary story. Because if you do that, you're going to get intimidated out of what you must do. You must steel yourself to abandon a lot of the book. This is a book where there is virtually no action set pieces as we know them to be. It's a very interesting thing. Everybody wears a sword in The Count of Monte Cristo, but very few people use one. In terms of the story changes, and especially character changes I made for this version, they were fairly significant. I began with making Fernand Mondego the best friend of Edmond. And there's a good reason for that. You ever notice that in civil wars, they always tend to be the most atrocious? Our Civil War, the Spanish Civil War, the Russian Civil War, the French Civil Wars, all horrendous. Something very weird about close people when they fall out. Oh my God, we were like this and now we're like that engenders a special kind of hate. That betrayal is particularly intense. So I thought that would give us an increased emotional commitment. I also did something else with Fernand. It's not just passion for Mercedes. It's just, you got a girl and I want her. Fernand is jealous of something else. He's jealous of Edmond's ability to extract joy from everything. And Fernand is jaded because he's a rich man's son. It's like a kid who gets a Porsche for graduating high school.
I know what you want, Fernand.
You did?
Remember when we were little kids and Edmond got that whistle for his birthday and you got a pony? Well, you were so mad that Edmond was happier with his whistle than you were with your pony. And I'm not going to be your next whistle.
It's a whole layer of Fernand. When Fernand says, if you remember in that in that dueling scene, Edmond says, "Why are you doing this?" And Fernand says,
It's complicated.
that's what he's referring to. And later on in that scene, he finally confesses it.
Because you're the son of a clerk! And I'm not supposed to want to be you.
And that's everything. It's about Edmond's passion for everything and Fernand's passion for nothing. Another character I basically invented was Armand Dorliac, who's the warden of the Chateau d'If.
Trying to motivate themselves.
I wanted somebody to be the personification of not simply evil, but the evil of the system. The notion that once you're in the system, it has a momentum of its own, and it doesn't matter about the merits or non-merits of the case.
I know perfectly well that you are innocent. Why else would you be here? If you were truly guilty, there are 100 prisons in France where they would lock you away. But Chateau d'If is where they put the ones they're ashamed of.
Now, once you introduce that perversity, the notion that, my God, you know I'm innocent? And it doesn't make any difference to you? Once you introduce that, my God, what world is this? Other things. Well, of course, big thing is Albert not being the son of Fernand Mondego, but being the son of Mercedes and Edmond. I never understood why the book didn't have that. I mean, it seemed to me, forgive me, Alexander Dumas, and all you fans, but how do you miss that? I mean, come on, let's get an illegitimate kid in here who's, and everybody can go away happy. In the book, I remember that Fernand, I think, shoots himself. I gave that to Villefort so that we could save Fernand for the duel, because Fernand's really the prime villain in the piece, in my vision of it anyway, and you gotta have a sword fight. And when these guys lose their swords and they come at each other with their bare hands, that's the kind of intensity you need when a hate this big has been built up. It would have been terrible if from 40 feet away he shoots him. Nah, maybe for Gary Cooper and Frank Miller in High Noon, that's okay. But for the Count of Monte Cristo, it's at least got to be blades. So I needed to save Fernand for that. Easiest part of the adaptation was the dialogue. Dialogue is great fun. You get instant gratification. You wind up laughing at it, and you say, this is funny. You get moved by it, and sometimes you cry. There's a line I love. I don't know that anybody else gives a damn about this line, but it's thrown away in there, but I just love it.
And if you're thinking just now, why me, oh God? The answer is, God has nothing to do with it. In fact, God is never in France this time of year.
Now, I love that line, and I thought, I know this is terribly self-serving, but I got a kick out of it. And it's fun to get a kick out of writing. No! I remember coming up with a line when Mercedes is shot.
Once again, Satara. I sees you out the corner of his eye.
And I thought, hey, that's a neat thing, corner. Of course, here we are in the 1830s, maybe God's otherwise occupied with the Alamo or something like that, but he remembers out of the corner of his eye, oh, Dantes, he's the guy who got really screwed in the Chateau d'If. Well, I don't want Mercedes to die. These two should be together. So I just love the concept of God seeing people out of the corner of his eye. And the truth is, if I could talk that way in real life, I would do it if I weren't afraid that they'd put me away in the Chateau d'If. Last Saturday night, I went in to see it with a real audience, regular audience. And I couldn't take my eyes off a girl who was in the center section, who was leaning forward on the edge of her seat. She couldn't have been more than 16, 17 years old. Just riveted to the screen. What, because I was so good? No, because Dumas is so good. Because a tale was being told about people she really cared about. And oh my God, you hear the gasps when you open up the chest and the chess piece is there. You hear it. It's all about story. It's all about character. And these people have not had story and character in so long. What would I say to the critics who charged that I wasn't true to the book? I'd say, thank you. Wasn't my job to stay true to the book. My job was to make a movie, not film a book. If you want a dead-on version of the book, read the book. It's a good book. It's just not a movie.
Background action! Action! Captain Reynolds is dead, sir.
Early on, when I came onto the picture and we looked around at a couple places, we thought, well, we can create Marseille and Ireland.
The Chateau d'If, which features prominently in the film, we thought surely we'll find it in Ireland, and we'll be able to take an Irish town and convert it to a Marseille town.
And we looked at a few spots, but it became apparent to me early on that it just wasn't going to look like Marseille because Ireland does not look Mediterranean at all. So we decided to go to Malta and look at that because we had heard things, and I thought, well, if I'm lucky, maybe I'll get 35% of the locations I'm looking for in Malta. We ended up probably getting 80% of locations in Malta. It's quite extraordinary. I didn't expect that.
Have you never seen Marseille before?
It was my home.
Whereas most of the rest of Europe is sort of been taken over by modern architecture, Malta still retains a very unique look.
I find myself in awe every time I get to come to a place like this and see a civilization that dwarfs ours.
The locations are exotic and really preserved well, like untouched by tourism. It really adds this authentic touch to the film so that you really will feel like you're transported.
The whole quality of the film, which is Mediterranean, I suppose, makes sense now that we're here in Malta.
And I can't think of another place where we could have found anything that looked like a Mediterranean port circa 1815.
Excellent architecture for the period, exactly like Marseille, 1814. And it also has a deep harbour, which enables us to get the tall ships in. They take a 15-foot draft. There's very few harbours in the world that can do that.
Because there are so few sailing ships left of that era in the world, there are only a couple of companies that still maintain these things. And in fact, they sort of travel around the world for productions to use their ships. And the ships that we brought on had to travel from England to Malta, and it took them 3 weeks to sail down there. Well, we made the most of them in the time that we had them.
You try to afford as much as you can and make it look as great as you can, and if you're lucky, you start with a backdrop that this dock affords, for instance, and you fill in the rest with the efforts of a lot of different people.
Hello, my fine young gentlemen. Care to join me?
We have 15 or 18 ships, some small, some large, a crew of 150 and 200. We have, I think, about 20 horses here from Spain, along with a dozen carriages, 250 extras. All the costumes were flown in from Ireland and England, and we sort of put dirt down on the roads and sort of packaged it all together to recreate Marseille 1806.
We went out to look at the island called Camino, and we just stood up and said, Chateau d'If. You could not have designed it better. It was unbelievable. It was up on this 200-foot cliff.
We cobbled together the Chateau d'If, because it does not exist in fact. And so the exteriors were shot in Malta, where we established it as this fortress atop a cliff. And the approach was into a cave underneath, but inside the cave, we cut to the set on Ardmore to watch them ascend the staircase that goes up inside the prison. Huge set. It was probably 7 stories tall, something like that.
That was described in the script as a great stone staircase, and that was it. That's the only clue we got. But what we wanted to do was create a living hell, and this is where he's going to spend the next 14 years. And we want to create a real feeling of dark, dank chamber, no getting out of there. The staircase was 80 feet high, 99 steps, and shafts of light coming through the top. So we filled it with smoke and candles, and very, very atmospheric.
It's funny, you know, because when you work on any picture and you're always concentrating on what it is you're doing, and then you turn up on set and you see what the art department have done, what's been going on for months and months, prior to you arriving. And I just have to say that what they've done on this has just been extraordinary.
The Count of Monte Cristo.
What we were trying to create there was a huge contrast to Edmond's life in this 8x3 cell for 14 years, and the guys that put them there. So we tried to give them the trendiest house in Paris for the time.
But it was the most extraordinary piece of artwork. This massive two-story place with pillars and incredible staircase.
The marble tiles, there were 750 of them individually painted. Obviously not real marble, they were wood, painted as marble. No one will ever know. Fantastic painters. The Tiapolo paintings on the ceiling and on the walls, my scenic artist, Steve Mitchell, they were absolutely fantastic. Nothing was stock. We modelled all the mouldings, everything, with model makers, plasters, painters. It was an absolute dream, so we didn't compromise at all.
And the depressing thing is knowing that it's going to get ripped down when you finish.
In the script, we had a Rome piazza. We went to Rome, we had to look at Rome. So virtually impossible to film them because the amount of tourists and how busy it is.
So we found a location in Malta, and the only thing it lacked was a fountain. So we had this fountain sculptured and made in London, and it's been shipped over. It's 36 feet high and practical, and that'll give it the real Rome feel.
So we brought 500 extras in. Tom Rand dressed them all in carnival wardrobe. So you've got a square full of people going wild around this constructed fountain. And I have to say the Maltese extras were really terrific. They were very enthusiastic. Even at 3 o'clock in the morning, they were still giving us their all.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is with great honor that I present to you His Grace, the Count of Monte Cristo.
When Edmond Dantes comes back as the Count and he's trying to establish himself in Parisian society, he holds a big party at this new chateau that he's acquired.
It was a big effort to pull that off. Powers Court, as you may or may not know, is probably one of Ireland's most popular attractions at the moment. It has beautiful gardens, and it was a long and complicated process to get all the permissions granted, all the deals negotiated in order to prepare that set. We hired more electricians in Ireland than any single film had ever hired previously. We had 40 electricians, I think 6 cranes and 5 generators, and we had 200 extras, which we'll duplicate to 1,000.
We set up a big party with 500 lanterns, lavish food, tables, and really, the trick about that was that whole scene was the entrance.
The Count's arrival needed to be something that was flamboyant and grandiose. We decided, well, the way to do that would be to have him arrive by balloon.
We were actually in the bar one night having a drink, and we said, wow, how are we going to get the balloon to land in the right place? And we said, well, you know, throw out ropes and people can be there, and then it got a bit sillier, and we thought, yeah, people can jump out and slide down the ropes and pull them there. It was just one mad creative moment. It was amazing, and I mean, when it happened, the couple of hundred extras there, the crew, I've never seen them so silent. They were just, wow, you know, and I hope we got that on the screen. Every set is a challenge, from the small one to the huge one. When you've completed a set and you're happy with it and you know you've achieved the look you want, it's fantastic. You can walk a director onto a set and you know he's going to be happy, and that's very fulfilling.
I started, first of all, as a competitive fencer, a sports fencer, and then I went to theatre school to train as an actor. Was a very bad actor, but found I had a way, I think, of making fights perhaps a little more real than they had been in the old Hollywood era. Easily, and go. 1, 2, envelop, go. Well done, okay. Nobody would believe the amount of work and effort that goes into choreographing a duel or a fight sequence.
We put at least 3 hours a day in every day, plus all the training that we did on our own. You're continually doing your parries and working to get to a point where you're not thinking, you're just reacting.
A major climactic duel will take 3 weeks to choreograph. It sounds like a lot of time, but it's not a lot of time. And if you think that Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers used to take 6 weeks on a dance sequence, it's not surprising it takes that amount of time.
You can't just get an actor and say, like, you know, OK, we've got 4 days to do a sword fight. In any sword fight, people look for skill, for balance and for style. It is a very difficult media to go into as an actor.
Funnily enough, I actually did some fencing when I was a kid, you know, when I was 11, and I actually thought I was pretty good and I won some competitions, but certainly when I turned up in Ireland and began the sword fighting training, I realised that none of it stuck at all, so I had to start from scratch.
My skills are mostly based on the sport, pure fencing, which I then adapted for safety, because, of course, with the sport, you're trying to hit somebody for real without being hit yourself. In film and theatre, what you're doing is creating the illusion of reality and keeping the actors as safe as humanly possible. So there are 2 very different techniques that have to be married together.
Fortunately, I had an athletic background that allowed me to, you know, think, okay, this relates. And the fact that you got to have good balance, you have to practice repetition and stop thinking, just react.
I see someone has tortured the sword.
Like, you can't go at half speed. It's got to be flat out to make it work. Very few people realize the amount of slow build-up, sometimes with actors who have never done it before in their lives, that is necessary to get them to a point where they can convince an audience that they really are going flat out for real. To the left knee, beat it aside, glance it through, into the hanging parry there. Do you want to just try that? I would choreograph, say, a sequence a day. That's one sequence of about, let's say, 11 moves. Next day, you would add the second sequence. Now you're going back over 2 sequences. Following day, a 3rd sequence. From there, Richard, OK, let's have another coupe, this time for right knee, but make it a little bit higher. So use this parry here for me, Ben, to there. And now let's have a disengage and a circular parry. So I'm going to disengage with the point over, follow around in a circle, Ben, and step back as I step forward there. Slowly, you're building up. At the end of the 1st week, you might begin to have a finished result. 2nd week, you're working on it, getting it together. And then the 3rd week is where you're perhaps making little changes, adjustments, so that finally you're ready for shooting, and hopefully you peak with the actors at the right time, ready for the moment that the camera turns on. I hope that there's something inherent in the choreography that I do that is not simply the normal cinematic sword bashing that you see going around in most swashbuckling films. Every move is planned, and what I endeavor to do is never make 2 moves the same. If you watch the pattern of blades, you would see, if you slow motioned it, there's very little repetition in terms of the movements. And this, of course, makes it extremely difficult for the actors, but I hope that the end result is worth the effort.
What we were trying to achieve is a blend of sword fights and physical fights based on reality, and I think that's what's come out in the Count of Monte Cristo, is that the desperation in reality, they will use any means that they can to win.
Now we need to walk through the next part, is that okay?
I still get very anxious the day that we're shooting that it's going to go okay, because ultimately it's the actors there, I stand back, I can't do much more except the odd word here and there in their ear to say this doesn't look quite good enough, or you'd look better if you did this or that. But it's the time to let them get on with it and stand back.
Good! Too good.
I rather enjoyed a sequence we did in the cell with Richard Harris, who had to train Jim, our leading actor. They were only working with sticks that were hidden away because there would be no weapons in the cell, a metal plate, and a cup, a mug. So by utilizing these, I was able to make the moves very simple for the actors, that they could perform well, and I hope had a certain amount of wit to it as well.
The knife fight between Jacopo and Edmond takes place on the beach, and Jacopo, supposed to be the best knife fighter that the pirates have ever known, is then put up against Edmond.
It had to be short, he had to look good, so it wasn't very long, and it was just a matter really of finding some self-defense moves. We had to see him look good quickly, and the other man had to be on the sand quickly, so it was just a question of selecting the right moves that they could perform well with speed and tell the story.
As you hope to live, do not move an eyelash.
But if you're totally truthful to what actually happened in duels and so on, I think there'd be an awful lot of waiting, an awful lot of pausing, an awful lot of being careful, and that wouldn't go down so well on the screen.
Touch him and I'll kill you.
The final duel develops inside this ruined chateau where there's a confrontation between the son and the father.
Yield, boy. A Mondego does not yield.
And the interesting challenge was to make it quite clear that when the son fought the father does not want to kill the boy. It's really quite a difficult message to get across to the audience, because if they're fighting, they're fighting.
Boy, if I have to, I will kill you. I will not stop now.
Nor will I.
So be it.
But then from that, the fight develops into the classic hero-villain confrontation at the end, and for this we went outside.
No, I couldn't live in a world where you have everything and I have nothing.
It was so important that this final confrontation should just have the audience on the edge of their seats.
The wheat field continually pulled on your legs, so you weren't able to get the kind of movement that you'd like to, and as far as speed, momentum. It was like running in sand.
It was really very difficult. We found the blades were hitting the wheat, moves would go wrong, but to see the two men out in this wheat field fighting away looked breathtaking, I thought. Obviously, you take care that the weapons are as safe as possible. You're not going to work with sharp weapons, that would be foolish. But there's always an element of danger, usually not in the early stages of rehearsal. It's usually just as the actors get confident and they're starting to enjoy it. That's the great danger when they start to get on top of it and something stupid happens.
Jim managed to actually wound me.
That was our last take on that number, and it was such a tight scene that I missed and cut him. And I went, I know that was bad. And he goes, it's okay.
Somewhere down there, these are the things that, you know, that you have to put up with as an actor.
What happened to your mercy? I'm a count, not a saint.
Later on, his shirt came up when we were in the makeup trailer, and I said, I did that to you, didn't I? I wasn't too proud of that.
No, it was fun, you know. When your adrenaline's going, you don't notice the pain.
I think, hopefully, what came up was a rather classic final duel that will both tell the story and be exciting, because ultimately, if it's not exciting and dramatic and real, that you do keep that danger between the characters, then you've got nothing.